Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
This week, we talk about driving, the penalties and consequences of driving without a license, and whether Minnesota should join the 15 other states that prohibit using handheld cell phones behind the wheel. Stay tuned for this and more on this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Lurkey. The Senate held a joint meeting of the Transportation Committee and the Judiciary and Public Safety Committee to hear testimony on the consequences of having driving privileges revoked. Joining me in the studio to reflect on the implications of what was learned is the chair of the Judiciary and Public Safety Finance and Policy Committee, Senator Warren Limor. Welcome.
Hi.
Can you lay out the rationale for calling this particular meeting?
Why, sure. Recent headlines have begun to tell us that there might be an increase in people driving after their driver licenses have been revoked or canceled, and then getting into accidents that cause injury or death. And as we have begun to just read some of the headlines, we wanted to make sure that, is this a real indication or a rise in this type of behavior? Or is it the effectiveness of good reporting, and the reporters are telling more and more of these incidences, but is that really reflective of an increase in the state? And that's why we wanted to do that. But before we write specific legislation, I thought it was important to visit the whole concept of canceling, revoking, issuing driver licenses. What are the penalties? Why would one lose their driver license? And then if we are planning on changing some of the consequences for bad behavior, what do we have in law now? And do we need to rewrite all of a full chapter of law? Or can we be a little bit more specific, a little more surgical, and see if there's gaps in our existing law and write laws specifically to cover where our weaknesses are?
And most of these incidences involve driving under some kind of impairment, correct?
That's correct.
Speaking of impairment, a recent article in the Brainerd Dispatch referenced a study by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration that said that Minnesota has the highest rate of recidivism for impaired driving. So we're apparently the worst in the nation. Why do you think Minnesota has a problem?
You know, I don't know how to really answer that. The reason why I say that is that legislators don't always follow every statistic of a out-of-the-state expert organization that's giving facts, figures, and statistics. We have administrations that do that type of thing. They follow the curves, they follow the research, and then if they think we have a problem, they will certainly give us that indication. That's not to say that citizens can't bring us information as well. And we try to glean as much as we can also as a good legislator. We try to keep our ear to the ground as well. Why Minnesota is leading according to this one indicator, I don't really know. It may be a cultural idea. You know, the number one issue that faced us in the legislature that got the most phone calls was Sunday liquor sales.
That's true.
Is there a causal link here? I think there may be more of a cultural indication that Minnesotans like to drink. And as a result, some of them will make bad decisions once they are under the influence.
And then as a result of drinking and poor decisions, there's long been a debate over treatment versus punishment. Do the penalties for driving under the influence or operating under any kind of influence need to be increased, or do more affordable treatment options need to be available, or is it a mixture of both? Where do you fall?
We've probably gone as a state as a mixture of both, punishment and treatment. But for those who are chronic inebriants, there's very little penalty that will change their behavior. They definitely need a very concentrated treatment model. But to be effective, you have to have a person willing to accept the treatment, willing to change. And a lot of people just aren't. They may go through the treatment, but deep down in their heart, they've convinced themselves either they don't want to change or they don't need to change. They're still in denial. And they can go through a program, they can say everything that needs to be said to get their little release from the program and get back into society, but that doesn't necessarily change their heart in order to change their behavior.
Now, one of the ways Minnesota has sought to address this is through DWI Courts. I believe that there's 18 right now. To your knowledge, are these making an impact?
I think they are. We have a number of specialized courts in Minnesota. They specialize in understanding the defendants. Perhaps they're a veteran returning that suffers from
PTSD
or perhaps a person who's had some traumatic events in their life and their family, or other causes, or financial issues. The courts are tuned into that and see if they can help alleviate and take that problem away, or reduce that problem in that person's life as treatment is initiated. It gives that individual a little more hope that there is a path, a better path out of this problem that's now gotten extremely complicated and unsafe for those around him.
If someone has a suspended or revoked license, and yet they still have a job, responsibilities, a lack of transportation options if they live in a rural area, they will drive whether they have a license or not. The Department of Public Safety's Jody Oscarson testified before your committee, and she believes that increasing ignition interlock devices is a viable solution. What do you think?
I think ignition interlocks have proven themselves as being an effective tool. They're a minor cost. Oftentimes the defendant is paying for that install of that device in their car. During a driving episode, there may be a time when that person gets a signal that they have to pull over within maybe 3 minutes of them driving, to again blow into the machine to make sure that the person that initially blew into the machine to start the car is the one driving the car.
To prevent the fraud that could happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of redundancies in that program that make it a very effective program for Minnesotans.
Now, you mentioned the cost of having the device put in. There's also the cost to reinstate your driver's license. There's also the additional cost to car insurance, court costs. Are some people driving without a license simply because they can't afford all of these costs?
We heard testimony today that one of the initial costs to get your driver license reinstated is a $680 fee. Now, maybe for most people that's manageable, but there are some people in a lower income bracket that have a problem with alcohol, and they have a problem with income. And if they can't generate that $680, they're going to drive anyway because they need their paycheck. Well, does the high fee now constitute the reverse of what behavior we want to create? We really want to create them, give people a reason to get treatment, become responsible, and be productive. And if we have such a high fee to just get into the first step to be considered for reapplication for a driver license, and it's so high that a good percentage of them can't do it, then we have to analyze. We have to determine, is this the right fee? And I think over time it's been determined that legislators in the past have used the dollar amount that originally started out many years ago at only $2.50.
I know, that's insane.
Now it's $680.
Right.
And so, now granted, that may be back in the 1920s, but nevertheless, the $680 fee goes not into any driver fund or a treatment fund, it goes into the state general fund. So they've used it as a cash cow to raise funds on people that don't have a constituency to protest it. That's what legislators commonly look for, is where can we find the source of money to raise without raising a lot of ire in our constituency. And they found one with drunk driving, and not too many people are too sympathetic to those individuals, so pour the fees on them. And in some cases, if they have a problem with drinking, they have a problem with family relations, they have a problem with their jobs, they have a problem all across the board.
It's affecting all aspects
and it's
of their
affecting. Once you put a heavy fine or fee on them, they can't get out of the hole.
Right. Senator Limor, we've got to stop there, but it's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
A new working group charged with solving the shortage of home health care workers heard from key stakeholders this week.
17 years ago when I started a home care company, we had a nursing shortage with there was just not enough staff to be had. Now, the nurses that are licensed have more options. There's still a shortage in home care because of the fact that we don't always have the best environments. They don't get to go to a fancy facility. They don't get to have happy patients all the time. They have to deal with families and conditions that may not be favorable, as well as the pay and the benefits. And we attempted to solve one aspect of that issue, not to say that the reimbursement rate is not a problem, but we attempted to solve that, and I hope that this work group will take that part seriously, that it isn't just about putting more funding at this. Yes, I think that is part of this problem, but it's also about being creative. Regular nursing, the primary difference between PCA level of care and regular nursing is administration of medication. Granted, there are other cares and assessments that are done, and that was part of the contention with some of the entities here represented today. But I think it's important to note that we want most of our licensed personnel in the state to practice at their higher end of their scope of practice, not at the lower end.
Each nurse is trained specifically to each patient. And obviously, especially for our clients who require several hours of care, from 8 to 24 hours of care per day, they have multiple nurses assigned to them. So we have training shifts that are also uncompensated, where you will have 2 nurses in the home for several shifts in order to prepare that nurse to care for that client. So as we talk about uncompensated costs, it's not just the administrative costs or the other regulatory overhead costs. It's true direct costs to ensure a safe care plan for those clients.
It's important to point out that the Olmsted Commission is to allow people with disabilities to live in the least restrictive setting. And it is a mandate that's been put forth to the governor and to the legislature to make sure that this indeed does happen. It does things like allow people to access employment, access quality of life, to go about and receive transportation services, to be able to seek out and seek employment opportunities, and to other basic areas that we all must take for granted in this world. However, if people can't get out of bed in the morning, they're not going to be able to even touch the Olmsted goals that are wanting to be realized. In a rate-controlled system such as the Personal Care Assistant Program, funding sources are capped and not responsive to market pressures. PCAs earn less than most fast food and retail workers, and it's extremely difficult to compete with these types of other businesses that pay more and also offer benefits that are typically very hard to attribute in the personal care assistant world.
My next guest is author of a bill requiring drivers to use hands-free technology while driving in Minnesota. Senator Jim Carlson joins me in the studio to discuss his ongoing efforts to get this law passed, as well as to offer his perspective of the recent joint meeting of the Judiciary and Transportation Committees. Welcome, Senator.
Well, thank you very much.
Washington State just passed a law called the Driving Under the Influence of Electronics, or the DWI Act, which forbids the use of all handheld gadgets while driving. Eating and grooming are secondary offenses. The Washington language creates a link in my mind of driving with electronics and driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Do you think these are similarly dangerous activities?
I do. Now, driving under the influence is a proven influence on your driving and on reaction times and things like that. So it's been against the law to drive while under the influence for years. Now, the problem with driving with an electronic device taking your attention away is it's not been found illegal, or it's not been passed as illegal. And I managed to get a law passed about distracted driving enhancing the penalty when there's great bodily harm and death. And so what we had to do is we had to define it so that a person intentionally disregarded something that they know. And what they know is that distracted driving can influence your driving. So that's what we have to do in this particular case as well, is to identify driving while you're speaking on a phone, handheld device, as being distracted. Now, there's a lot of, there's a lot of leeway in there where, does that include fiddling with your radio? Does it include driving with a hands-free device? Those are the kinds of things that we have to address and make sure that we put some lines between them.
Is there any element of this Washington law which basically just takes away all handheld activities that you would like to see modeled in Minnesota?
Well, I'm not familiar with that particular legislation. I do know that as of October 1st, that Oregon did pass something that was very similar, and they put a lot of teeth in their law. It's a $250 fine, and if you have a third offense in 10 years, it can be 6 months in jail. So it's very, very serious. They're recognizing that this is a very serious problem. And I think all of us recognize it as well, because as we drive, we see people that are wandering in their lane. They're staying along at stoplights when it's gone green. There have been many tragedies where people are not watching out. So it's it's something that I think people recognize, and we just have to do something about it.
Well, and you mentioned tragedies, and I think that often the impetus behind these laws is the death of someone, and then that person's family gets involved in trying to make that loss mean something into the future. Is that true behind your effort? Did somebody lose a child or a family member?
Yes, there have been several people, one of them being a person that I happened to know for several years, that her brother-in-law was tragically killed when he walked across the street by his own driveway. We had the bus driver from southern Minnesota, a retired bus driver, that was killed when he did the same thing, went to get his newspaper, and someone paid no attention to him being on the street and hit and killed him. We had that incident in East St. Paul where a woman was talking on her phone and made a turn and ran into a child. Now, the child was injured, but not severely. So, it's obvious that people are just not paying attention. And this is a rather new thing, to have telephones that you can use in the car. And I think we all know that you do pay a lot of attention to what's going on in the telephone, and you somewhat blank out on what's going on around you.
You mentioned teeth. What kind of teeth do you think legislation in Minnesota needs to make people change their behavior?
That's a tough question, because we don't want to make it so bad, so hard, that for instance, the law enforcement officer has to make a decision too. So if he sees a woman taking her kids to school on 8 o'clock in the morning, and she chatted on the phone, or maybe calling the school and telling them that she's going to be late, is that something that deserves a $250 fine? Or is it something that we can have a little bit of compassion on that person? Now, if there's an accident, that changes the story. So when I think of enforcement, I'm thinking of publicity, training, awareness, maybe bumper stickers, maybe things like that. CARE 11 has a long series of distracted driving spots that they've been putting onto their newscasts. And I think people are getting very aware of it. And every time you see some tragedy that comes into the newspapers, I get an email. So we're getting people informed. I have some of my constituents that are very strongly for this bill, and I don't know if they've had a personal tragedy or not, but they certainly are irritated with the people that are driving and speaking on the phone and really are distracted.
Well, I'd like to bring this into the recent joint meeting that you had. Senator Limor said that recent headlines were one of the reasons why he called the joint committee. There was an incident in September where a reportedly unlicensed driver under the influence of drugs was using her cell phone and killed Wayzata police officer Bill Matthews. Can more laws really stop these kinds of incidences from happening?
Well, that's a very interesting question to have. Now, driving under the influence of drugs is we already know that's dangerous. And in fact, in that case, because that's against the law, the not having a driver's license is probably a lower level crime. And this person is probably looking at criminal vehicular homicide or at least criminal vehicular operation. So this particular law or change is not going to affect that level of crime that much, because that's a very serious one, and it goes well above talking on a phone and driving, and especially talking on a phone and having an accident or having a crash. We don't like to call them accidents anymore.
Right, because it could have been prevented.
Right, yes, but they certainly are preventable. Every time I get involved in this subject, I think of a bumper sticker, maybe 2 bumper stickers. Hang up and drive now, talk later. And those will probably, I'm hoping that somebody's going to take the initiative to have something like that printed up before we come to the committee in February.
Before we have to go, as a member of the Transportation Committee, that joint meeting, what did you take away from that? What was useful to you?
The main thing was the technical details of what constitutes a suspension, a revocation, and a cancellation of a driver's license. In America, we have been, I think, pretty lax on how we train drivers. Other countries train their drivers very seriously. For instance, we had a German exchange student. He managed to get his driver's license in Minnesota. Now, that gives him a driver's license when he's 16, and you can't get it in Germany until he's 18. He did the behind-the-wheel training here with a school, Bob's Driving School in Burnsville, and had the test there. In Germany, you have to have a certain number of hours. You cannot be trained by your parents, which is far different than what we've had here. And I think that we need to have more training. We need to have, for instance, skid pad training. I have a friend that runs a skid pad training
like
school.
how to stop in the midst of a skid and the unforeseen things that can
skid
happen.
On water, skid on snow, skid on dry pavement. And those things I think are really important for drivers to know in the U.S. And we just don't pay attention to that.
Senator Carlson, I'd like to talk more about this, but we've got to go. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Tucked away in the north wing of the state capitol basement is a space that pays tribute to Minnesota's German heritage. Brian Pease of the Minnesota Historical Society talks about the controversial history of this historic gathering space. The state capitol Rathskeller is sort of a time capsule from 1905 when the building was built. What is the history of this impressive basement room?
Yeah, this is a really significant part of Cass Gilbert's visioning of these spaces. And it's unique because it's a German Rathskeller, so it's patterned after something you would find in a German public hall. The tradition is they debate upstairs, and then at the end of the day, they come down, have a few drinks, talk to each other, so there's a camaraderie and a fellowship. So it's kind of a place to unwind after a busy day. So there's that, the German immigration, that was our largest immigration group, has been throughout our history of a state. And so that is a nice nod to the German heritage, but also to kind of impart that tradition of a German public space and a place to gather below ground.
The combination of anti-German sentiment and prohibition had a big effect on the Rathskeller. What happened?
That really was a key event in how you would have seen this building and this space in particular after World War I began. So it was kind of a double whammy, a two-edged sword for the Rathskeller because it has a lot of drinking slogans written in German. So now we're fighting a war against Germany. Plus there was a lot of strong prohibition forces. So you have German drinking slogans, which is not a good combination for what people saw as a place to bring the public down to or be a part of that establishment. So this entire ceiling, all the walls were whitewashed. Everything was painted white. And that was the tradition for many, many years. There was a time in the 30s when Governor Theodore Christensen painted some of the slogans back in. And then we're not sure why that got covered up again a few years after that. And it wasn't until we did the restoration of the space in 1999 that we brought back all the original stencils, all the drinking slogans again, to give you a sense of what it would have appeared like in 1905.
How extensive was the research that needed to be done to bring it back to its original intent?
Yeah, we did a lot of research just to understand the space a lot more. That's where we never really found any evidence to say that this was, a governor's edict because of the war, World War I. Most of the documentation we see with letters to the governor, women's auxiliary groups, was to kind of advocate for the prohibition, to remove the drinking slogans. But it's a combination of both. I think we can understand that's kind of the sentiment of America at that time.
Why should visitors to the Capitol come see the Rathskeller?
Well, as I said before, it's a really neat space. It's something you don't necessarily expect to see in the state capitol. And once again, since it's been restored, 1999 it reopened in 2000. It's a full-service, cafeteria again, so you can
during
eat
the
here.
legislative session.
During the legislative session, you can come down here and eat. And then it's also just a beautiful place to see that decoration. And it's a combination of an American Rathskeller and a German Rathskeller, because you have traditionally in a Rathskeller in Germany, you might have German eagles. Well, here we have eagles that are American eagles instead of a German eagle. And then you also have two dates that are important parts of our state's history: 1849, which is the year we became a territory; 1858, we became the 32nd state. So those dates were part of that original stencil. And so there's insets as you walk through and see this restored space. We were able to preserve some of the original stencil, and so that's inset against the wall, and there's a new layer of plaster on the edges of that or above that has the new stencil. But throughout this space you can see these really neat examples of what it looked like in 1905. The public is welcome to come down here. We have a nice little exhibit that Minnesota Historical Society put together, a little display to explain a little bit more of the history, and you can see some of what happened to this space. And you also discover there are 22 layers of paint on top of the original art. So there was a lot of overpainting and painting of the ceiling over time.
And since the renovation in 2017, there is overflow space now by the governor's dining room and the judicial dining room. Is that right? Yeah,
there's additional eating space, and that's really a nice addition to the public access and usability of this space. This can be a noisy space when there's a lot of people here. It's a neat historic space to have lunch. But also, if you want a little bit more quieter conversation or overflow, there's a kind of an adjunct space down the hallway that's another neat space with reproductions of the furniture that was there, the tables and the chairs, some television, so if you want to watch the committees or the session, you can kind of keep up to date with that. So as part of the restoration project, it's a really important part of what we do here and how the public can use the spaces.
Join us again next week as we delve into more topics affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Lurkey, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.